This is about the recent election we had here in the city of Chicago for mayor. Now, since we recorded that piece, we wound up having an election, and so far what wound up happening was there are two candidates that were left standing, and they're going to have a special election or a runoff election come up in the next couple of weeks. Now, again, much like you're going to hear me talk about in this upcoming segment, I have no idea at the time we're recording this who's going to win this runoff. It's between two African-American female candidates, one that goes by the name of Lori Lightfoot and the other one that goes by the name of Toni Preckwinkle. Now, Toni Preckwinkle, which that's a name that you don't really forget, Preckwinkle, P-R-E-C-K Winkle, W-I-N-K-L-E. That's a name that's not really hard to forget, right? Well, Toni Preckwinkle, who was a president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, I call her Soda Pop Toni. She was the one a couple of years ago that tried to implement a sugary drink tax here in Chicago. And what that is, it's a tax on all beverages that have sugar in them. And I think that's something that they were doing in New York. I'm guessing she saw that as a way to try to fix the deficit here in Illinois. So she figured, well, what better way to do it off the backs of average everyday men and women in this state by charging them a tax on beverages that have sugar in them, like soda pop and juice. All I can tell you is that when this thing went on, when this tax was implemented, I would randomly go into the grocery stores here in the city, and you would go in the beverage aisle and you would hear people randomly complaining about this damn soda pop tax. Even got to the point where some people were going across the border to Indiana to do their shopping, just as a matter of principle, because they didn't want to pay the tax, because they thought it was a silly tax, and people were very, very frustrated about this thing. Well, Soda Pop Toni got wind of it, and she did a press conference, and in my opinion, she came across very surly and mean-spirited about this tax, and it really rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm thinking, well, you work for the people. If the people are telling you they don't want this tax, why the hell are you so defiant about it? So it was almost kind of like it was going to be her way or the highway. But what eventually wound up happening is I think they wound up voting to put the tax on hold because so many people have been complaining about it. But I'm saying all this to say that those were the last two ladies standing out of the pool of 15 some candidates that were running for mayor here in Chicago. You also had Bill Daley, who was Mayor Richard Daley's brother, and he wound up running. He also he took a donation from a guy they're calling like the richest man in Illinois. Now, this guy goes by the name of Ken Griffin. Now, Ken Griffin has been running around for the past few years, donating tons of money to failed political candidates. He gave failed Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner a donation. According to this, it says he's given Rauner and Mayor Emanuel both tens of millions of dollars. Now, Rauner is a guy who, by the way, is a billionaire. So what the hell does he need with more money? But Griffin stands up and he donates money to Rauner. He's giving money to Rahm Emanuel. And Emanuel now is not running for re-election. And I suspect that the reason why he's not running is because of the Laquan McDonald scandal. But I could be wrong about that. Now, Griffin turns around and gives Bill Daley $1 million. This Griffin is quoted as saying, well, about Daley, he says, well, he'll bring a diversity of views across the city on our most pressing challenges of creating jobs and reducing violent crime and improving our schools and blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm thinking, hey, Ken, if that's really what your agenda is, if you're really so interested in improving schools and reducing violent crime, instead of taking that money and backing all these failed candidates, why don't you take that money and invest it in these communities where this stuff is going on? Seems to me that would be the smarter thing to do. I mean, if this is what he's really concerned about, I mean, he's the richest man in Illinois, according to the story. We'll take that money and invest it in the communities. But you and I both know what he's doing. He's buying favors. But these are the kind of things that go on here in Chicago when you talk about politics. I talked recently on this podcast about an alderman in Englewood who was brought up on charges of corruption. Now, if you know anything about Chicago, you know that Englewood is one of the communities that's been hit hardest with violent crime, schools that are struggling, not a whole lot of jobs. So it's a community that doesn't have an abundance of resources. Well, you get an alderman that comes in, and what is he doing? He's brought up on corruption charges. Now, this guy, Cochran, pleaded guilty. It says, according to this, he took $14,000 from a charitable donation. This, by the way, again, is a community that could use this money. So you have people donating to charities to help community, and you have the alderman who, instead of is looking out for the people that need it the most, he's taking the money and doing God knows what. So if you live in the Englewood community and you're wondering why community is falling apart, because the people who are in charge of getting funds to people that need it aren't doing it. And he's also been accused of things like taking bribes. And this, by the way, this guy, by the way, was also a former police officer. So, and then you have these assholes like Donald Trump who ride through these communities and they say things like, well, look how black people live. Well, Donald, guess what? If you have the alderman raping the community of resources, what the hell do you expect? So all these people are full of it. They are full of it, right? But let's get into this piece that I recorded about the race for mayor here in Chicago. If you go back to our, what was it, Silent? I think it was our 33rd podcast, 32nd or 33rd podcast. On that podcast, I talked about a guy by the name of Willie Wilson. Now, if you heard that podcast, you know that Willie Wilson is running for mayor of Chicago. And what happened, he was going up against Rahm Emanuel, along with a few other candidates, some of which are running again in this election. And not only did Willie Wilson try to run for mayor, he also, and I don't know how many people knew this, but he also tried to run for the presidency. The last presidential election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Willie Wilson was running ad campaigns about running for president, which obviously went nowhere. I mean, he didn't even make it to the debate stage. So a lot of people probably didn't even know that Willie Wilson was trying to run for president of the United States. Well, when I recorded that podcast, Willie Wilson was, and by the way, that's a name that is easy to remember. I mean, it just kind of rolls off. Willie Wilson. Willie Wilson. Silent, when I was in grammar school, kindergarten or the first grade, somewhere around up in there, the name of our school bus driver was Mr. Wilson. So it's a very common name, you know. Well, he was all in the news at the time we recorded that podcast because he went to a church here on the South Side and he started passing out money to the congregation. Cash, cold hard cash. Willie Wilson at church on Sunday made an appearance and he gave the congregation money. I mean, he was just handing out money. And I saw this thing on the news and they showed the people coming out in a single file line and Willie Wilson was standing there just handing them cash. Now, I don't know how much cash he wound up giving to each individual, but when it was all said and done, it was reported that he gave out about $200,000 worth of cash at this event. Well, that raised the eyebrows of a lot of officials because Willie Wilson was planning on running for mayor. And the thing about it is it comes across as if he's trying to buy votes. Now, there was no official race going on. They weren't allowed to put their names in for the race here for mayor until the fall. This happened a couple months before the fall, about the start of the summer or midsummer, somewhere around up in there, but it was close enough where when election time comes around, you're going to remember it, but not close enough where he would get in trouble for violating any kind of campaign laws because there was no official race going on at the time he gave out this money. Now, and I don't know when this race comes around that, and by the way, I have no way of knowing what the outcome of this race is going to be at the time we're recording this podcast. I assume by the time this podcast comes out, the election would have come and gone, right? But what I'm getting at is I don't know how much weight him passing out that cash is going to hold with the congregation. And I wish there was some kind of way that like a poll could be done or something, like how many people got that money come election time are going to remember, man, Willie Wilson gave me some cash. I think I'm going to vote for him. You know, I don't know how effective that was. But I'm bringing this up now because because you have this race going on and they're doing like debates and they're having forums and all the candidates are up on television and they're giving out their points of view. Now, what we're going to do before I move on, we're going to play a little clip from this forum. This is Willie Wilson.
We move on to our last candidate, Willie Wilson.
My name is Willie Wilson. I do not believe in raising taxes on people who cannot pay taxes, number one. I believe that we have to balance the budget through ways of creating a tax system that will lower taxes to the corporation as well as our citizens in the city of Chicago. I believe we got to have the casino, tax marijuana, legalize it, and making sure that we could bring these things into the city of Chicago to make dollars to help pay for a pension for police officer, pension for the fire department, pension for the school teachers. I believe that we have to be fair with our citizens of the city of Chicago. I believe I have to be honest. I'm a business person. I was raised up poor, a sharecropper. We work our way through. Violence have got to stop. I believe in order to take care of violence, you got to have economic equality in all neighborhoods and not just leave out a few.
All right. Thank you, Willie Wilson.
All right, so you heard the clip. Now, here's where I'm going with this. First of all, let me just say that my intent is not to clown Willie Wilson on the way he sounds. That's not where I'm going with this. But what I'm curious about is that I know that there are going to be people out there. They're going to hear Willie Wilson talk, and they're going to make some pretty harsh judgments based on the way he speaks. And what I'm wondering is how many people out there would fit in that category? Because let's face it, I mean, when you're trying to run for any kind of office and you're trying to sell yourself, that's one of the things that people take a look at. They look at body language, they listen to speech, they look at appearance. These things are all part of making an impression. And I know that a lot of these people were probably college graduates and they're walking around with master's and bachelor's degrees and they walk around in $500 suits and all this kind of mess. Right. What I want to know is, and what I'm curious about, if you heard him talk, would you say, I'm not going to vote for him just based on the way he sounds? Or would you look at the guy and say, well, he became a wealthy businessman, and you and I both know that that's just not something that's easy to do. As a matter of fact, I remember having a guy tell me some years ago, he said, running a business isn't easy. If that was the case, everybody would be doing it, you know? And there's some truth to that. I mean, there are a lot of people out here that are trying to run businesses or want to become entrepreneurs, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't work out like that, let alone become wealthy at it, you know? So again, I'm wondering, are there a percentage of people out there that would hear him speak and would not vote for him based on the way he sounds? And I imagine there's probably a percentage of people that will. For me, I'm not voting for him simply because to me, he comes across as a bit desperate. There's something about, and I talked about this on that podcast, there's something about a guy standing around passing out cash to people that comes across to me as a bit desperate. And not only that, again, like I said, he was trying to run for mayor. That didn't work out. Then next thing you know, here he is trying to run for president of the United States. So it just comes across to me as a bit desperate. I mean, that's the only word I can think of to use. He comes across, and I'm thinking, well, why is he so fixated on getting into politics? And usually people that have that mindset, especially somebody that's a wealthy businessman, usually people that have that mindset, they have some kind of end game. Now, you heard him in that clip talking about bringing casinos here. Now, I don't know if he's trying to get in bed with these casinos or what. And I'm going to tell you something else too, man. I don't know how I feel about Chicago being a casino town. I think the revenue would be great, but, you know, Chicago's kind of a crime city. I don't know what the history is of Las Vegas, but I know Chicago is kind of rough. You start talking about bringing in a bunch of businesses here that are dealing with a lot of cash and a lot of alcohol. I mean, that's usually a bad combination. You know, but I mean, that's just my opinion. And I don't know. I could be totally off base on that. I mean, I don't know. But I'm wondering why there's a reason we've never had casinos here before. Maybe they figure people couldn't handle it. I mean, I don't know. And it's like, again, that's just speculation on my part. I could be totally way off the mark on that.